What's up, Kingdom of Rock? This is Matt Gibson with another exciting episode. Every Thursday at 5 p.m., we're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, and all your other channels. Well, actually, that's the only channels we're on. But anyway, today we're here with obviously Michael Melenda every week. Mike, what's going on? How's San Fran?
It's sunny. It's beautiful. It's awesome. I have a backyard, so what could go wrong?
That's nice.
Yeah,
that's nice, dude. You look like you're in a happy mood today.
I'm in a happy mood today, and the dogs are at daycare, so we will not have any uninvited guests into the interview today. So I'm sure that's happy. Dude. Everyone in the Kingdom of Rock who are so used to my dogs interrupting the interviews.
I know, dude. It was pretty funny. Well, speaking to Laurence up here, Laurence Juber is here. He's a guitarist, a composer. He's played with a few pretty successful musicians in his career. Yeah. One or two, that's right. Mm-hmm. And obviously, he's got a lot of guitars back there in his studio. So I see you have some shiny records and things back there. So we're going to talk about all that stuff today. How's it going, Laurence?
It's going fine. You're tempting fate mentioning the dogs, because Hope might let him in to my studio.
Well, they couldn't be any more ill-mannered than mine, so I think we're going to be fine.
Yeah, mine are pretty well behaved. So. Yeah.
Sad. I call mine the punk rock pups because that's kind of what they are. But, they're cute though, which saves you from getting really angry at them.
It was pretty funny. We had Steve Vai on a while back, and right when he was saying some super profound stuff, the dogs just went crazy, and Steve was like, all right, he just was like, it was just a perfect moment. So they're part of the family. They're definitely we need to get them on the website, Mike.
Okay, well, let's talk about this later. We've got Laurence here. We need to talk to him about stuff. And I kind of wanted to start out with Laurence because on your latest record, the Fab Fourth, you do A Day in the Life. And typically when you're around other guitarists, as I'm sure you know, and you go, well, who did the best instrumental Beatles cover? And if you didn't say Jeff Beck's version of A Day in the Life, you pretty much got your ass kicked. But now, I can, when bars open up again, I can start all kinds of bar arguments because I can go, well, actually, there's one other version of Day in the Life that's just as awesome as Jeff Beck's. I mean, that's like my new favorite A Day in the Life version. I can't.
Oh, thanks.
It's an amazing arrangement of that, and also I don't want to blather on here, but my old buddy Blair Jackson, who interviewed you or wrote a review of the album for Acoustic Guitar, I think. Mm-hmm. I used to work with him at Mix Magazine. He made an interesting point where it's like when you listen to these songs, you're not just taking harmony and melody. You're also maybe there's a cool instrumental part or a cool harmony that you'll focus on for a particular moment. And it kind of brought up to me that you just don't go, oh, it's, da 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 da. I mean, you actually really study these songs to figure out what to do when and how to, I guess make the mix more cinematic, I guess. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. I mean, because I really approach it primarily from the music. Not just the guitaristic side of it, but how does this work as a piece of music? And it's funny you mentioned Jeff Beck, because I just this week did an arrangement of Nissan Dorma from Turandot, Puccini, which Jeff Beck did an amazing version at one of the Crossroads festivals. Wow. And I'm a huge fan of what he does because of just the way that he articulates it. He's playing fingerstyle on the Strat and using the whammy bar and all of that stuff. And it's so musical, but in a unique way. But there his, being true to the musical substance of it, and then finding what works guitaristically so that it's actually interesting to play. Because, sometimes I'll approach something and it's like, this just doesn't have the mojo. It doesn't get me excited about playing it. But I think the cinematic aspect is the narrative side of it, because there's a story to tell. And my wife, Hope, who produces these records, she was the one who persuaded me to do albums of Beatles in the first place, and still persuades me. That because I started this, I started doing the fingerstyle thing as a composer, not as an arranger. But because the Beatles music is so, to use a hackneyed word, iconic and transcendent, that it just, there's so much musical substance in there, but to then take that and the guitaristic side, but then tell the story as well and get the feeling that the original record might have inspired, but from a slightly different perspective. So if it satisfies Hope and it satisfies me as a guitarist, then it's okay to put out there. But I've done certain arrangements. I mean, on that album, like Lady Madonna, I did like 4 or 5 different arrangements before I was happy.
And what specifically? I mean, just you weren't feeling the mojo like you said in the previous 4 arrangements, or what kind of things would stop you from saying this is a released version?
It just doesn't. It doesn't speak right, you know. And very often it's finding the right tuning, the right key. I mean, I ended up doing Lady Madonna in C, G, D, G, A, D in the key of G. And that let me capture what, you know, because Paul's, you know, the intro to that especially really drew on a record by an English trumpet player named Humphrey Lyttelton, had a hit in 1956. With a song called Bad Penny Blues. And it starts off with this really cool barrel house piano, and you pull it up on YouTube and you'll hear immediately where Lady Madonna came from. And to capture that kind of energy, but also I'd been listening to Joseph Spence. If you're not familiar with him, it's really worth checking out because he's a Bahamian guitar player, big influence on Ry Cooder. And most of what he did was kind of gospel stuff, but there's 1 or 2 tunes that weren't, but there's just this amazing kind of like it's stride guitar, but with a kind of a Jamaican kind of Caribbean kind of undertow to it, and I just felt that kind of energy was really, I think, something what I was going for. So sometimes I'll try and like cross-fertilize things to get where I want to be, just pull an influence from here or there. And then let it evolve from that. But, you know, because I think part of it is because I'm just a student of music, a perpetual student of music. So I'm always going on YouTube and kind of going down the rabbit hole. You know, I'll start with Django and then go to Oscar Aleman and then see where it goes from there and, you know, find some obscure player from the 30s that I've never heard of that does something really cool. And it's like, oh, you know, that's kind of a cool thing to do. Like in the 30s, there's a lot of chord solo work just on the top 3 strings. And what, you know, how much that kind of works like a horn section. And then, you know, trying to bring those kind of elements in to orchestrate or, you know, big band arrange or whatever.
No, it still sounds like voodoo to me, and like you blow my mind every time you play live or put something on a record. I mean, I can't imagine picking apart the pieces, arranging, composing, bringing your influences in. I mean, that just sounds like so much stuff to juggle. I'm surprised, you know, you have the brain or the time to bring all this to the table, you know?
Well, I mean, it's a process. And I'm fortunate that I have the time and I have the inclination to do it. You know, there was a period, I mean, because in my career, I mean, since Wings, you know, even before Wings, I started off as a studio player. And then I got into Wings, and that was like, you know, my master's in, you know, in music from McCartney University. It was a great education. But once I got to LA in the early 80s, and I did want to travel because we were starting to raise a family, I started gradually getting into composing and arranging and producing. And so I got very used to sitting in front of a computer all day and, you know, working my way through various iterations of sequencer programs and 24, you know, 16 track, 8 track, 16 track, 24 track, dragging the machines along with, you know, video and, you know, scoring picture and stuff. And so it's because the technology evolved to the point where it's so much easier to do all that stuff. And having had those years of kind of dealing with it, that being stuck now in the studio and not being able to get out and perform isn't that much of a change, because I always had that track going on. So what I'm trying to do is merge the two by doing like Facebook Live, and 3 times a week now, on Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 1:30 Pacific time. And I do like a mini concert. And that way it gives me a focus as a player, but it also gives me that audience engagement. And Facebook's good for that. The communication, the comments and the chat that goes on. Facebook, it works well for that kind of thing, better than YouTube, because on YouTube you lose the thread of the chat. You can only access it by watching the video again, as opposed to Facebook, where it just stays on the page. I haven't yet done anything on Twitch, but I'm thinking about doing some clinic format stuff there, because that seems like a good platform for that. And also because that's a gaming platform and I've done some video game stuff, there may be an opportunity to kind of cross over and maybe get some attention from the Blizzard fans, because I've written stuff for Diablo and
I saw that on
StarCraft and all that. Yeah.
That's are you a gamer?
No.
Have you even tried any of those?
A little bit. When I got hired to work on Diablo 3, I went to Blizzard and they put me in God mode.
Oh,
So,
yeah, where you could. That's
where,
cool.
You can just keep going, and so
you can do anything.
But it was really, by the time kind of video games really kind of established themselves, it was just, it was more for my kids, especially my eldest daughter, Nico, who, from the time that she discovered America Online, ended up being the captain of a spaceship in a Star Trek sim. It's like that. For me, I needed the time to play guitar, because that's my game. It's like it's digging deep into what you can do guitaristically and how, because I was always fascinated by harmony and counterpoint and how bass lines work. Right from the very beginning, when I was listening to records and I'd try and figure out what the rhythm guitar was doing or what the bass part was doing. And that was really part of what led me into studio work, but also later what allowed me to realize that I could arrange, and I studied music in college, university, and got a Bachelor of Music degree, but a lot of what I studied was musicology. So that gave me this kind of overview of style too. So I can, I learned how to fake it in whatever the style might be, which was always a good attribute for being a studio player.
Oh, just want to mention, speaking about feedback, Toby Simmons said, yes, Twitch, please. So you might want to put that on the front burner there, Laurence.
Okay.
Also, Linda Rita Morgan says she loves your live stream, so that's a thumbs up there.
Oh yeah, I'm seeing the comments now.
Matt and I have had little discussions about, some musicians do really well with Facebook Live, not having the audience right in their face to kind of give that organic feedback. And some musicians, they either try too hard or they're just not that interesting. They're a little bit freaked out by the camera and being alone in their room. I mean, but it sounds like you have kind of naturally gravitated to this, and it's not a no fear, all benefit, I guess, right?
Well, I mean, there's a certain amount of tension in there because it is live, but having been a studio player and having been on, I was band leader on a late night TV show in LA back in the early 90s. Fritz Coleman, who just recently retired as the Channel 4 weatherman, started off as a stand-up comic, and he had a late night show, and I was the band leader on that. So I kind of got used to being in front of the camera and having to kind of make a musical statement in one shot, where you don't get to do retakes unless it's really necessary. Of course, when you're going live, there are no retakes. So, bum notes, you just let them go and you move on. And that's kind of part of the fun of it, I think, is that the audience like that reality of it. But it can be a little nerve-wracking, especially if I'm doing something that I've never played before. and it really is a lot of concentration. I have to stop. I mustn't look at the comments. Because
Yeah.
if I see a comment and then, then my attention gets divided, and I'm really, I have to focus because I'm not a technician. I never was a technician. I just use technique to accomplish whatever I need to accomplish musically. And of course, I've got repertoire, especially my standard concert repertoire, which I don't have to think about. There's kind of entrenched muscle memory there. But when it's something that I really have to say, okay, what are the changes? And I might be in DAG-GAD, for example, and where, what, not having that muscle memory, just, having to think about what the progression of notes and chords and bass notes and all that. It takes a lot of concentration, but I think that's part of the fun of doing it, is to really be forced to focus.
Now, you always look completely comfortable and awesome in, the live stream, but are you the person who scripts them out and then rehearses them before you actually do the show, or do you script them out and just do the show, not worry about it, or how do you kind of approach the production values of your live streams?
I spend a fair amount of time just making sure that it's sounding good, and I don't always succeed, but because sometimes it's like trying to hit a moving target when it comes to streaming. But I do spend some time working on the sound and the visuals just to make sure that, even like something as stupid as if you're in autofocus and if I up the brightness on the screen because I'm in front of the screen, it can throw the focus off, and it's like, so there's technical things. And to begin with, when I first started doing it, I was running audio through a physical mixer. And then I discovered that if you go directly through Chrome, you're only getting, it only gets whatever audio interface you're using. It only gets channels 1 and 2, which was fine when I was using an outboard mixer. But when I started, I have a Universal Audio Apollo, which has a virtual mixer. So I thought, oh great, I've got Capitol Studios Reverb. Let me add that. But it didn't work that way if I was going directly through Chrome. But if I use Ecamm Live, which is like OBS, it's a similar, kind of like streaming studio software, that somehow has a loopback function where the reverb actually gets added in, even though it's not on the two primary channels. So I can actually run multiple sources through that. But there was a lot of trial and error involved in that. And then when I went to do some StreamYard stuff, I realized StreamYard didn't work that way because it's browser-based and not app-based. So, one can get caught up in the technical side of it. And then, that's all the kind of the left brain, right brain stuff as far as, how much attention is going to go into that versus needing the time to just do something creative and meaningful. But you were asking about preparation. I mean, I did a show a couple of weeks ago that was entirely improvised. There was nothing prepared. And I used some of the classic, the kind of what I call archetypal chord progressions as a basis for that. Like, for example, in the Renaissance, you had the Romanesca, which is kind of the chorus of Greensleeves. Is that progression is a Renaissance progression. There's another one, the Passamezzo Moderno, which is also known as the Gregory Walker, is a very familiar chord progression. It's like the chorus of You Got a Friend, for example, is that progression. And using a familiar progression like that, but as an improv, there's something familiar, but then it's like, where the inspiration takes it is kind of a unique moment.
So, Laurence, let me ask you, I see a guitar out there behind you. What's is there a story to that guitar? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your guitar?
Well, this is the latest incarnation of my signature model from Martin. Hang on, pull up another mic. This is an OM. It's an orchestra model, so it's a longer scale, so 25.4-inch scale. 2 1/4 inches here, 2 1/4 here, and 1 3/4 at the nut, which is typical of an OM. And this one is Cuban mahogany with a moon spruce top, high alpine Swiss spruce. So there's a little bit of kind of guitar making voodoo in there. And Cuban mahogany is kind of sonically, to my ears, it's halfway between Honduran mahogany and Brazilian rosewood. It's got the woodiness of mahogany, but with the gravitas of Brazilian rosewood and the projection of rosewood, of that kind of rosewood.
When you collaborate on the design for these guitars, do you actually say, hey, I want to try Cuban rosewood, or I'm not happy with this particular top, can we try this? I mean, how does that process work? Because I know you've got a pretty long history with this signature model.
Well, that goes back to about 20 years ago when I had like I had two Collings OMs, orchestra models. And, I was thinking, I really should get like Martin, should have Martin make me one. So I called up Dick Boak, who at the time was doing artist relations at Martin. And, Dick has a long history with that company. And I said, this is what I want. I want an OM 18 mahogany with a cutaway. And I want these dimensions, and I want an Adirondack spruce top. And he was surprised that I was that specific about it. And the guitar turned out great. And not long after I got it, actually the day after it arrived, I was in the studios at Capitol recording an album. What was the album? It was Different Times. It was came out about 2001. And I took it with me, like I went back the next morning to finish up some stuff, took it with me to record a tune, and it was still venting lacquer fumes. And I was getting a little bit kind of high on the lacquer fumes. But shortly afterwards, I did a double header, I did a co-build clinic at Norm's Red Guitars with Dave Edmonds. And the Martin rep was there, and like a day later, I got a phone call from Martin wanting to know if they could do it as a signature model. And that started off as an OM18, and then they said, can we do it again? And I did it. We did an OM28 in Brazil, limited edition in Brazilian and in Indian rosewood, and then later in Madagascar rosewood. And I tried experimenting with maple and koa. And it ended up that, I'd kind of exhausted what I could do with the Adirondack tops, and I wanted to see what the European tops would be like. So it gradually kind of whittled down to the point where it had to be done in the custom shop because it's all hot hide glue construction and it's thin finish, and it's really, this one in particular is just kind of, I don't know if I could go another step with it. I think that's as far as I could go with it. And at this point, I'm old enough that I don't want to order another guitar and have to wait 20 years before I can really know what its real sound is.
The big mahogany that's red at first as it looks on the screen. It looks beautiful from here.
Yeah, it looks a little redder on camera than it really is in reality. But it's a slightly richer look than the regular Honduran mahogany. But Cuban mahogany is, that's like Brazilian, it's an endangered species, but there are storm-felled trees from Florida that they can use. So it's not a generally used wood, but I really like the sound of it.
Well, you are so specific about woods and things like that. When you get ready to record a record, are you thinking, oh, I need the Adirondack spruce for this, grab this for that, and all this stuff is kind of pinging around your computer in your brain?
It depends. It depends on the record. It depends on how it's being done. If I'm recording in my own studio, what tends to happen is I'll like have a few guitars available and then see which one suits that particular tune. It's like on the Fab Fourth, the opening cut is Across the Universe, and I ended up with that guitar. With that one, I used a double 18 authentic Martin, because it just the smaller bodied guitar just seemed better suited to the vibe of the tune. But my previous album, Downtown, I did in one 5-hour session at Capitol with Al Schmitt Engineering, who's like the godfather of engineers.
Oh yeah.
And that was all done on one guitar. That was the same one I just showed you, but in Guatemalan rosewood, which is kind of like near Brazilian. But since I got this Cuban mahogany one, and since I've been doing the Facebook Live where I've tried different guitars for different sessions, and I just seem to have ended up with this Cuban mahogany one being kind of the alpha guitar. But it's nice to have that opportunity to really do, be able to ABCD the different guitars and see what kind of speaks the best.
Al Schmitt, I think he's like 90 and still doing sessions, right?
Yes, yeah, it's pretty amazing. Yeah, but it was so cool because we did this session. We were in Capitol B, which is just a fabulous room, and he set up 2 of the Neumann, the U69s, which is not what I would have imagined he would use, and they were just kind of like facing me, kind of up here, that far away. So also, I usually use like a ORTF with the mics kind of spaced like that, about 18 inches in front of me with small diaphragm mics, but these were large diaphragm. And he just got this great image of the guitar, and the faders were up, and we chose which reverb chamber to use, number 6.
Yeah.
Those Les Paul designed Capitol reverb chambers. And that was it. And it just, I had worked on these arrangements for about a year and a half, and just went through them and did 1 or 2 takes and kept going and got an album out of it.
Amazing.
So
go ahead, Matt.
no, I was just going to say, Laurence, one of my favorite questions to ask people, artists, since I'm working on becoming an artist myself full time, was there a moment in your career where you're just like, I can't believe this is happening. This is the moment. This is whoa, I think I've arrived, if there's a such thing as that,
Yeah, there's a few like whoa moments, but one in particular was, when Wings recorded Back to the Egg, Paul had this idea of doing a rock orchestra. So he put together what he called Rockestra. And the guitar section was like, it was me, it was Hank Marvin from The Shadows, it was Dave Gilmour, Denny Lane, and Pete Townsend. And
wow.
Jimmy Page's amp was there, but he never showed up. So
you were on the stage with all of those people.
No, this was in the studio to begin with.
Wow.
We had John Bonham playing drums along with Kenny Jones. It would have been
my
would have been
gosh.
Keith Moon, but he died like a month earlier.
Oh,
and Steve
my
Holley,
gosh.
who was Wings drummer, and it was just like this huge band. And we recorded a couple of songs, and came out on the album. In fact, the Rockestra theme won the first Grammy for rock instrumental. And then when we did the Kampuchea concert about a little over a year later, which was a big series of benefit concerts for Cambodian refugees, and there was like one night was The Who, one night was Queen, and one night was Wings, and we recreated this Rockestra, and we did like a short set of Rockestra, and on the Wings tour that immediately preceded it, we did Let It Be. And, I was lead guitar, so I'd play the solo. Well, when it came to doing it with the Rockestra, the solo's coming up, and I look around, there's Pete Townsend, and there's Robert Plant kind of faking it on Paul's Hofner bass, and there's, John Bonham and Keith and Kenny Jones, and there's like Dave Edmunds and Billy Bremner and all these great guitar players. Jimmy Honeyman Scott from the Pretenders was like standing next to me, and Denny Lane, and the solo's coming up, and it's like I look around and I realize, I'm just going to step forward and play it because that was what I'd been doing.
Yeah.
So that was one of those moments where it's like, all of a sudden it's like I'm on stage with Paul McCartney. I'm surrounded by people that I grew up listening to. And I'm playing the lead, and then I get to the last phrase and I smell brandy fumes, and there's Pete Townsend kind of leering over me. So that was a moment. Also, Paul had me go with him to France to do an album with Ringo, and when we cut the first track, and I'm sitting there with an acoustic guitar, and there's Paul McCartney on the piano and Ringo on the drums, and it's like, I'm here with half the Beatles.
Yeah.
How cool is that? But there have been other moments. I mean, especially Michael, you'll appreciate this because I've played on Monkeys records, and
Yeah.
one time we did Boy Meets World. I was playing on the score of the TV show, and they had the Monkeys on as guests,
Yeah.
and just those kind of moments where it's like, I was listening to these guys when I was, a teenager, when I was 15 or whatever. So that always gives me a little bit of a thrill. And whoever I might work with, and I've worked with, I remember 1976 when I was doing sessions in LA, I did an album with Rosemary Clooney.
Wow.
And she was so cool and such a great singer, and how, those are so memorable. Things like that are very memorable.
That's crazy. Well, I bet the Monkeys liked you a lot more than they like me. So good.
I don't know. I'll have to ask Mickey next time I see.
Yeah, well, I think Mickey's okay with the whole concept of punking up their music now. Mike, I've gotten growls from Mike, but yeah, don't out me to Mickey, please.
Okay. I promise.
Yeah, but also, how Hope, obviously she's got her own career, and she's done a ton of stuff, obviously, in TV. But how does she work with you as a musician? How's the back and forth typically when she's producing, Laurence Juber? And what do you tend to lean on her the most for?
Really, it's for the emotional content. It's for it's creating just something immersive in the performance. And I'll do something that I would be, I would reject if I was producing myself, and she'll say, no, don't touch that. That's real. So because she has a theater background, she's a comedy writer. She understands having a sense of humor in the music, not necessarily in terms of funny, but in terms of the humor in the kind of the old school sense of the dimension of it, and the perspective on it, and just how the story is being told. So it's really it has that kind of depth to it. And she'll make decisions about which guitar she likes the sound of better, because her ears are just better than mine. She is more high end than I do, for starters. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's well, I imagine her theater background is very helpful for, once again, that cinematic quality that you tend to bring to your recordings.
Yeah, I mean, that's really a big part of it, is just that sense of telling the story is really important. And of course, she and I have also done a lot of work together as writers. I mean, she used to have a comedy rock and roll band called the Housewives, which at one point we had Maggie Mayle, John Mayall's wife, was in the band. So John used to come play harmonica with us on some of the gigs, and then that got turned into a musical, and we're actually right now in the process of developing a Brady Bunch musical, and that's a fun project, because she grew up with the Brady Bunch because her dad created it. So that's this weird nexus of pop culture that I live in, coming from kind of Wings, British invasion, second generation British invasion, and American TV comedies. It's kind of an interesting perspective on things.
Yeah, definitely. I moved to LA in last September, and I was military for the last 20 years. And, like coming into Los Angeles, and like I just had lunch with Bird the bailiff from Judge Judy a few days ago. Like, it's just like, it's funny. I would tell my parents, all the musicians I'm meeting, and they're like, oh, that's nice. That's nice. Yeah. Man, when I told them that, it was like I'd arrived. It was really cool. Bird's a really great guy. He's been on the show. But it's definitely like I can relate to what you were saying earlier about, being around your heroes. The first day I was in LA, Verdine White from Earth, Wind and Fire was at this party, and I handed him this hand drum, and the whole room exploded and clapping, and it was amazing. Like, it's just that whole like I don't know what it is. It's just like that right vibe that propels you forward. I'm starting to get pulled into it myself, you know, and
Yeah,
where I want to.
it's interesting in LA. When I first got to New York, because when I first moved over from England, when Wings folded, I was in New York. And in New York, it was kind of instant. It was like, I was getting called in for sessions and getting involved in projects pretty much as soon as I got off the plane. LA took longer. It's a bigger environment, and it was a much broader musical environment than I expected. And there's a syndrome that a lot of the time people come to LA expecting to do one thing and end up doing something else. Like songwriters come here and then end up becoming TV composers. Happens a lot. And the reality is that business can be quite lucrative, because if you write music for a hit TV show, then you're forever collecting ASCAP checks or BMI or whatever your performing rights organization is. So there's a lot of avenues in LA, but you have to kind of find them as opposed to them kind of immediately opening up. So it took a little longer to establish myself here. But once I did, I found myself doing, just hundreds of TV shows and movies and records, and especially up through kind of the mid-aughts of the 21st century, up until about, 15 years ago, when I really transitioned fully into being on the road a lot more as a concert performer, and continuing to put out records. Part of that was because my kids were older, so I was less worried about leaving home too.
Do you have advice for a young musician coming to LA, like now in today's world? Like, I know I've been just trying to schedule as many meetings with people back to back as I can, just like meeting more people. Do you have any thoughts on like moving to LA for your music career?
Well, I mean, certainly meeting people is essential, because you just develop a network. I mean, the overall perspective, I think, and this is something that I've really learned from my younger daughter, Ilse, who's a songwriter, is that if you really want to make money, you want to be a writer. And whereas in the old days, songwriters were very separate from musicians and producers. Now, those lines have blurred. So you program the kick drum and you're a songwriter. You get in on the writing, because the musician rewards aren't necessarily there in the same way as back in the day when, you were, your W4 would go on the pile with the other studio musicians at the end of the day, and you'd get your union payment, and then you'd get, in my case, 30 years of studio work, and I get a pension from doing that. But when it comes to songwriting, and that blurred line now between writing and producing, that's really where, if you want to make an impact, that's an area to focus on. Because the thing is, especially now, because there's no live performance, and studio work is not like it used to be. When I first started doing sessions in the early 70s, there were no computers, there were no sequencers. If you did a demo, you had to hire musicians, or you did everything yourself, but you needed that capability. Now it's very different. I mean, you don't need anybody. I mean, you can loop somebody else's record and there's your track.
Right.
Right. So I think that for me, there were certain things that I think were valuable. One was that I just tried to make myself indispensable by doing things that were, like I became a specialist in playing acoustic fingerstyle, so that was a niche that I could occupy.
Yeah.
Of course, now, people don't realize that I also play a lot of electric guitar too, because I've just put so much focus on the acoustic side of it. So that, that kind of thing in terms of finding your niche. But the other thing for me is, because I can read and because I understand a lot of musical styles, I've been at various times in my career something of a pinch hitter, where I can fill in. It's like I would get a call for a session at Warner Brothers or something because Dean Parks would be out of town. and so I would be kind of on the list of somebody that could fill that kind of role. Whereas because I got here, by the time I got here in the early 80s, the players that had really come up in the 70s were already kind of, those were the alpha players.
Mhm.
So, wasn't a lot of room to you couldn't really muscle anybody out of the way. I found my own connections and my own situation.
Well, speaking of occupying your space, I don't know if you know Lance Allen. He's
I do know Lance Allen, yeah.
Lance is watching right now. He said hi.
Hey, Lance. Yeah.
And what a brilliant guy in getting independent artist streams, like 20 million streams. He's a genius at that.
Remarkable. Lance was very helpful recently because I did a single with Christy Linnae, who's a wonderful player. And she had a few hours to spare before her flight and stayed with us the night before. And so I said, come in the studio and let's jam. And we recorded what we did and actually wrote and played a tune in that space. And so we put out a single a few months ago, and Lance was helpful in having me understand how Spotify works. Because, I like with Pandora, for example, I was used to the fact all my old Christmas music was getting played, but I didn't really understand Spotify, and so he kind of helped with that. In fact, I've got a playlist that I haven't put up yet that I compiled a whole playlist of fingerstyle stuff that I put him on, but it's like I got so distracted with a lot of other stuff that I've got to now get back to Spotify and remedy that. So,
well, speaking of that,
everybody, Lance really schooled, I think, everybody out there when he came on the show. It was like wide open mouths when he started talking. So thanks, Lance. And
I did want to mention the Kingdom of Rock playlist that we just started on Spotify. And so all guests of the show get to add 10 tracks to the playlist, and then we're going to promote it and get it shared out and all that stuff. So that's one of the benefits of being a guest on the show.
Yeah, and the fact is that the streaming ecosystem and how the revenue comes in, through Sound Exchange or through, like in my case, my records on my own label are distributed through a company in Oakland called A-Train, which specializes in instrumental music. And so, when I do a release, they help with getting stuff on playlists, but more along the lines of like iTunes or Apple Music as it is now. But in reality, what I found, the challenge is just getting new stuff to actually get on there. I mean, I must have been at least 10 years ago, if not more, I did an arrangement of Stand By Me. So I originally did for a Hal Leonard folio, and then James Jensen at Solid Air Records, who I was on at the time, said, you really should do an album of this stuff. So we put out an album, and then that track got licensed for a Diamond commercial. And then within a week, it was like, on as it was then iTunes, if you went to Stand By Me, it was Benny King, John Lennon, Laurence Juber were the top 3 versions of Stand By Me. Well, it just in the last few weeks made its way up to kind of my number 1 track on Pandora.
Oh, nice.
But that's, it took a long time to kind of get into that particular ecosystem. Whereas I have other tracks on Sirius. Now, Sirius pays a lot better than the streaming services because it's actually radio. It's digital radio. So, and I've got tracks that have been on there for some years, and then other ones will kind of like pop up, especially when Coffee House was, before they changed the format, they would play my Beatles stuff quite a bit on Coffee House. And now I get my She Loves You has been getting played, I think, on the Beatles channel. So hard to keep track of all that stuff. I get a spreadsheet. I get a spreadsheet from A-Train with 10,000 lines on it. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. So actually you let A-Train kind of take care, like if they're looking at Sirius, they know that's a big producer as far as, revenue.
No. Actually, that one, Sirius, I get done through, Michael Jensen, who's been my publicist on and off for decades, has connections at Sirius. So that kind of thing would tend to go through a publicist more than through a distributor.
But is that kind of, on a Lance Allen level? I mean, do you get on the Coffee House channel, but if you do get something on the Beatles channel, that's kind of a big, because a lot of people listen to that. So do you have to actually kind of push that to happen, or just do
it kind of, I mean, I'll go on the Beatle channel and they have shows that I've been on that channel. So I'm kind of especially in that Beatle world that, I'm, because of I'm Beatle adjacent.
Yes.
So there's some familiarity there. But, again, this is stuff that's taken many years of kind of convergence of what I do and the connections I've made, and, and just the fact that having been in Wings in some respects, was a nice kind of burnishment of my resume, but it also connected me with an audience that doesn't go away, because the Beatles, it hasn't gone away.
Right.
And I kind of got a sense of that even, when I first came to America and as a Wing, and realized that the Beatles had a very different, there was a very different perspective on them compared with England. That they were much more revered in America than they were in England. And when you think about how long it took Liverpool to actually acknowledge the Beatles to the point of having like a John Lennon airport, and it was only a couple of years ago that they actually got statues of the Beatles in Liverpool. But then they realized that they were making a lot of money out of tourism, and so it became I think they started to really appreciate what they had. But I think that for me, it's just been a lot of different things that have just kind of come together, and connections that I've made 40 years ago kind of suddenly become meaningful now. So you just never know where it's going to come from. I mean, I'd never had any anticipation that I'd score any video game music, but Russell Brower, who was head of music at Blizzard, somebody that I'd worked with on some children's recordings back in the 80s, and then he went on to work with video game companies. At one point, he was with Disney at Imagineering and hired me to write an hour's worth of music for Disney Sea in Tokyo. So if you ever go to Disney Sea in Tokyo and you eat at Magellan's restaurant, the music that plays is a suite for acoustic guitar and string quartet that I wrote as a commission. And that kind of thing, it's just, you never know where it's going to come from,
It's when you said kind of a while back about you program a kick drum and you get songwriting, I always giggle at stuff like that, because I wonder if John Bonham was alive today, if he would just be busting into every publisher's office. I played the drums. I deserve songwriting credit for that.
Yeah. I mean, look, think about Andy Summers. Somebody, I forget who it was, used the intro to Every Breath You Take, and Sting gets the writing credit, even though Andy came up with the lick.
Yeah.
Nowadays he would have got writing credit. I mean, that's how it changed.
That's weird, but I just always, it's funny. It's like the football players, the class of the Johnny Unitas's. I mean, this is American, so I apologize for this, but the football players that I grew up with in the 60s, I mean, they got paid like $7 a game or something, and now these people are getting like $50 billion a season. I mean, it's the same. It's interesting. The music industry has kind of moved somewhat in that regard, but that's not really what I want to talk about. Your family is so talented. You mentioned Ilsa, and I know that she's been doing a lot of writing. So maybe you update us on what she's doing at the moment.
Ilse right now. Well, Miley's current single, Midnight Sky, Ilse co-wrote, and Ilse's worked on what's his name? Now my brain is forgetting it. Mark Ronson's last album. Also like Leaky Lee, for example, on the kind of the more indie side of things. Shawn Mendes, Mercy, Panic at the Disco, High Hopes, which is the most performed adult pop song of the last decade. She has co-writes on all that stuff. And she's working on her own stuff too. So, she's, she kind of just paid her dues for a long time. I mean, we were paying her parking tickets until, probably like 5 years ago, but very gladly, because we knew that she had a path there, and it was just a matter of time. But when they do somebody writes a book about her career, I mean, there are very specific steps that went through where various people who mentored her or introduced her around, and how it all developed. It's too much to kind of lay out now, but it's really it's a success story, because we knew when she was 14 and she wrote, she'd written 3 songs, and Hope grabbed her one night and said, "You're coming with me," and she took her to an open mic night, and Elsie just kicked and screamed about it, and then ended up realizing the audience loved it, and it was like, oh, maybe this is something I can do.
That is so awesome. She doesn't ever drive you crazy by walking in with her modernist urban ideas and go, "Dad, yeah, I think this might be a little too backdated."
I don't know. I mean, she wrote a song with Harry Styles, "Treat People with Kindness," that was on his recent album, and I got a call. "You doing anything this afternoon?" And went over to the studio and laid down a rhythm guitar part, which ended up on the record. So actually, that album is like the first #1 album I played on in about 20 years or so.
So she did pay you back for the parking ticket payments. That was nice.
Yeah, I think that pretty much covered them. I think.
Nice.
Yeah, well, but I did make sure I got on a union contract. So there you go.
That's good.
That's one thing that's different for me. Like, I'm coming into LA now, and like union and all that stuff. I'm doing a different business model, because I'm like 50. I'm starting now. I'm not going to be poor. Like, I don't want to struggle that much just by only limiting myself to strictly the traditional income streams of music and everything. Have you? What have you been doing as far as advancing into the future for revenue streams and things that are beyond the traditional climb the ladder in the music industry thing?
Well, I'm very fortunate in that I don't have to rely on gigging to pay the bills. I've kind of achieved some financial independence. So like doing Facebook Live, for example, is really a pro bono thing. I mean, it's just kind of keeping people from going crazy, in the midst of all of this. The ultimate monetization, I think, really is beefing up the streaming revenue. And also, because I started my own label a few years ago, that to be able to just get a bigger piece of the action, as opposed to getting an artist royalty, but actually, getting the label share. But I do miss the live performance, and there's something about, going and playing at a performing arts center and getting a check at the end of the evening, and it's like that. There's a satisfaction that comes with that, but there's no back end to it, not unless you create it yourself.
Right.
Whereas, royalty streams, that kind of mailbox money can go on for a long time if you have something that has some success. And it doesn't have to be something that is kind of on a big pop level. I mean, Lance Allen has proved that with, his mastered that particular musical ecosystem where the revenue comes because the stuff's out there and it gets played. And it has a lot of potency to it. So it really depends on what your kind of end goal is. And I'm not trying to, at this stage in my career, I'm not trying to establish myself.
Right.
I am trying to expand the base of people who know me. And I'm doing that even now in LA. I mean, over the last few years, I've started playing out a lot more on electric guitar in LA. Mostly because an old friend of mine who goes by the name Richard T. Bear, who actually, we worked together in New York in 1981, and he was standing next to me when I met Hope. He and I reconnected. He has a band called Route 66 with Denny Sywell from Wings on drums and Paul Ill on bass, who works with Bob Weir, and the horn section is like Joe Sublett and Mark Pinder, who, these are the guys that were on the Conan show, and it's a kick-ass band. It's like 9, 10 pieces, depending on whether we have a backup singer too. And I've been playing 2 guitars, and I've been playing, it gave me a chance to really kind of bring out, the pro reverb and the pedal board and I have an old Schecter Strat from Van Nuys era Schecter from 1980, which I put new pickups in and, actually figured out how to wire up a Strat. It's not rocket science, I discovered. There's 2 things I've learned how to do this year that I appreciate. One is how to do my own guitar wiring, and the other is how to rotisserie a chicken. So,
that's awesome.
Both useful skills, I think.
Well, I appreciate the fact that Hope actually popped in with a thank you. Thank you, Hope. I always live in fear that, you could have said, hey, you guys can't interview my husband. Please shut up. So thank you for supporting the Kingdom of Rock, and I appreciate that. And then also, I think, some of the discussions we had early on when Matt and I were starting this about, how do musicians kind of survive and, keep their mojo going during not being able to gig. And there was a lot of discussion about, I have a record, do I let it out? Do I not let it out? Do I wait till I can tour? And I think that, as you just mentioned, your Facebook Live concerts are not, so much, to make money, although it does push you out there in the world. But I appreciate the fact that you're doing that just to give us, something to listen to keep us happy. I think that's a great thing for a musician to do, is to go, I know I can't tour, but I'm not going to sit here and cry about it. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, and I'm going to keep people happy, people who enjoy me. I'm not going to stop that. I'm going to put joy out there into the world. So thank you so much for 3 times a week doing that for.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. And, it drives a little bit of merchandise sales. I have my online store.
Mm-hmm.
It drives a little bit of that. But, when it comes to releasing a record, I mean, the reality in these days is that physical sales, CD sales, are really just show merchandise. I mean, yeah, some of the stuff sells through on Amazon, no question about it. And, I've got, they'll always come in with a bunch of, A-Train will give me a bunch of orders for, Christmas stuff, for example, because that's Christmas music's 25% of the music business, believe it or not.
Did not know that.
Yeah, and there are people who listen to Christmas music all year round too.
Mm.
So, the physical merchandise is one thing, but getting the music out there, if you have something that you're proud of and you want people to hear it, then, that's the democratization of music distribution is really the unique 21st century thing. You don't need a record label. You can be the record label. You just need to, fill out some spreadsheets and make sure you get all your, get your masters done right, so the meta information is where it's supposed to be. And
Yep.
You got to do the, some aspects of it right. But ultimately, getting something out there is not that hard. Getting people to pay attention is the important thing. And to build up some pre-release anticipation, so when you launch it, you actually get some attention, and maybe that spreads out, and maybe it has some kind of viral, I hate to use the word viral right now, but some kind of exponential growth to it.
Do you think the streaming revenue that, obviously people like Lance have proven that you can make a living if you're clever enough to put yourself in the right situation, right? So when you hear artists saying, we don't get paid enough money, we're getting robbed, but there's people that are basically just independent artists making $100,000 a year as a musician. Do you think that's just going from the old system to the new system and adapting to it? Or is it really truly unfair what artists get paid?
Well, I think you have to also understand that there are two distinct revenue streams. There's the writer-publisher share, and then there's the performing artist share. So, I do a cover tune. It doesn't affect my performance royalties. you know, and, you know, whatever goes to, whether it's, you know, Lennon McCartney or whoever, you know, the Harold Arlen estate or whatever, that's a separate revenue stream from the performance royalties. So, and in Europe, it's a little different in Europe because the, like in England, PPL, which is the one that collects digital royalties, also collects on terrestrial performance royalties. Where artists and performers in America are getting screwed is that there's no artist royalty on terrestrial radio. You know, so an artist gets played on, you know, when Elvis got played or Frank Sinatra got played on the radio, they didn't make any money from that. That's why Tom Parker got Elvis's name on Heartbreak Hotel, even though he didn't actually write the song.
Yeah, they were trying to sell records at that time.
They were trying to sell records, and, you know, record royalties were fairly minuscule. I mean, if you really go through and you really kind of calculate how artists were getting paid, you know, they've always really made more money out of performing and out of publishing. Again, it goes back to the writer-publisher side of it. You know, when John and Paul would get together and they said, "What should we write today?" And so, let's write a swimming pool.
Yeah.
You know, because they understood that that's really where their money was coming from. Of course, they were also gigging like demons. I mean, you know, even before they got a record deal, they were doing 4 gigs a day. I mean,
Wow.
You know, they were crazy. You know.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you got to remember the Beatles were the greatest cover band in history before they ever put out a record, you know, a real record of their own.
I will say one thing, now that Mike's been on the show as my co-host, I have learned more about the Beatles than I could have ever thought, because it's like all of the people that are like the generation before me, the Zeppelin Beatles guy, you're either a Zeppelin guy or a Beatles guy, it seems like.
Huh.
And it was like, and so like there's these, like Jimmy Vivino's been on the show. He's a Beatles guy.
Right.
You know, and it's like, it's just really, it's like a world-class education on the music industry. And that's what we really, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh,
I just, to even be able to sit here and listen to these stories is a privilege. And so it's really wonderful that you've been on the show and share your stories with us and Kingdom of Rock and all that stuff. I wanted to we're at the top of the hour, so I wanted to give everybody a chance to closing remarks and all that stuff.
Well, I appreciate you having me. And, you know, I mean, the fact is we're merely scratching the surface, you know, of this stuff, because there's so much. I mean, whatever direction you want to go in. I mean, we could spend a year just discussing Beatles, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you are in LA. We can go to lunch and do that anytime you want,
we
bro.
Could. I played down in, actually, you're in San Pedro. I played down there at the Warner Annex. Which is a venue.
Yeah, I've been by there a few times. I was thinking of wondering how much it costs to rent that place.
Well, maybe we should have you on a Laurence Juber Beatles only show, and then we can bore the crap out of Matt because we're not talking about heavy metal.
We could if we got Laurence and Jimmy on the same show, can you imagine the stories?
Well,
yeah, we would just shut up and let everything.
That would be a 4-hour podcast.
Well, the closest I got to metal was, there was a band called Checkered Past.
Oh yeah,
which was the rhythm section from Blondie and Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols and Michael DeBar. And I was on a session with a record producer named Michael James Jackson, and I was playing a Les Paul through a Marshall, and I played a D minor lick, and he said, "Play that again." And he put a cassette. I mean, this is like 1984 or something. He put a cassette in the machine, and he said, "Play that again." He recorded it, and he gave me the cassette, and he said, "Go write a song with Steve Jones and Michael DeBar, because they have this band Checkered Past. I'm producing an album." And so I did, and we wrote a song called "World Gone Wild," which was a lead-off cut on their first and only album. Kerrang! Magazine in England voted it Heavy Metal Album of the Year. It sold maybe 3 copies, I think. Yeah. I mean, it just kind of like disappeared. They toured, and then I think Steve was having issues, and Tony Sales was in the band too. And on the album, I did a bunch of guitar arranging, and I ghosted guitar parts, and then forgot all about it. And then a few years later, Hope had picked up a stack of LA Times newspapers to throw out into the recycling, and noticed in the calendar section that was sitting on top, there was a little thing about Apollo Pictures were making a movie called World Gone Wild. And she thought, aha,
Oh
there's a
yeah.
song, there's a movie. So
Good
she called up
opportunity.
her brother Lloyd, who was one of the producers on the Brady Bunch, and said, do we know anybody at Apollo Pictures? And he said, yeah, we do. We know the president of Apollo Pictures was an associate producer on Gilligan's Island. And so Hope got in touch with this guy and ended up talking to him on the set where they were shooting the movie in Arizona, and said, I haven't seen you since I was 7, but my husband's a musician, and there's this song, World Gone Wild, maybe it will work for your movie. And he said, well, thanks for doing this, but we already have a song, World Gone Wild, and it was done by Checkered Past. And she said, well, same song. And then they sent me the script, and the lyric of the song was the first page of the script.
That is so
So
Nice.
the next thing is I get a phone call from the head of business affairs for the studio, and I got taken out to lunch. And subsequently, I took the riff and I orchestrated it. I did, I had a little MIDI setup, and I did a MIDI orchestration of it, and went down to where they were cutting the movie. And in those days, it was on a moviola. It was like still film. There was no video. Yeah. And they had a scene with, they didn't have any temp score, any temporary music for. And so we queued up a cassette player and hit play right when they hit play on the moviola. And somehow, miraculously, I had hit every cut in the picture, and they offered me the scoring gig. So I got to score the picture based on this D minor modal lick that I'd played, just tossed off on the session. And it just goes to show how, something as basic as that ends up being a movie with like Bruce Dern. I mean, I just thought it was the coolest. It was kind of like a B- movie, but it was a Bruce Dern movie. How cool
Yeah.
is that? And Adam Ant was in it too.
Yeah, those kind of things were just the wheels,
Yeah.
Yeah.
go together. I mean, those things just blow my mind that it gets to that. That's really an awesome. It's really an awesome story.
Yeah, but a postscript to that, I was at Fur Peace Ranch with Jorma Kaukonen and doing some teaching there, and we were having lunch one day, and I said, "What'd you do last night?" He said, "Oh, I watched my favorite movie." I said, "What's that?" He said, "World Gone Wild." And he hadn't even noticed that I had scored it, because your name comes and goes in the opening credits. And
Yeah.
But just so funny.
I always wondered about that credits in movies. I'm like, what's even the point? It's like, but that now that I'm in the industry, I'm reading it. I'm like, who's that guy? Wonder what, let's look him up on the internet. Like now you can actually instantly know like, oh, this guy works at Universal Pictures now, and it's like, it's so cool to like look at all the credits now.
I remember when I was working on the opening credits of Good Will Hunting with Danny Elfman, and we were watching the playback with the picture, and he was talking about how he wasn't really a fan of kind of having big orchestral swells when the composer's name comes up, and then and then we're watching the playback, and there's a big orchestral swell right when his name came.
Right, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
That's funny. Well, Laurence, we haven't even had a chance to get in. We should probably have you back. We haven't had a chance to get into your educational initiatives because you do a lot of teaching, which is important. We probably we could talk 7 hours about the Beatles.
We should do an all Beatles episode and just bring in people that are from that school of music, so to speak.
That would be fun. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. That sounds
Very
good to
cool.
me. Yay.
All right.
Well, thanks again, everybody, for watching. I wanted to say thanks to Veronica Ebert, Linda Rita Morgan, Robert Marcello, Toby Simmons, Hope Juber. Let's see who else we got here. Lance Allen, as we already mentioned. Thanks for watching the show today. And this will be available instantly on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. So share it with your friends and tell the world. Kingdom of Rock out. Thank you, Laurence.
All right. Thanks, gents. Much appreciated. Cheers.
Have fun.